Millionaire agreed to marry a plain bride by arrangement, but he couldn't believe his eyes when she... Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. Millionaire agreed to marry a plain bride by arrangement, but he couldn't believe his eyes. When she... The heavy rain drummed against the glass walls of the coal corporation's top floor, turning the Manhattan skyline into a blur of silver and gray. Inside the dimly lit boardroom, Ethan Cole sat at the head of the long table, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the document in front of him. It was not another contract, not another merger. It was a marriage agreement. Across from him, his uncle, Richard Cole, leaned back with a smug smile. You know the terms, Ethan. Your father's will is very clear. If you do not marry by your 30th birthday, the controlling shares go to me. Ethan's pen hovered over the paper, the ink trembling. He had spent his entire life building this company, working through sleepless nights and ruthless deals. And now, his future was being held hostage by a clause written by a father who never believed he could love anyone. Who is she? Ethan finally asked. Clara Bennett, Richard replied. She is plain, quiet, and from an old business family your father trusted. Nothing glamorous, but safe. The word plain hung in the air like a sentence. Ethan exhaled slowly. This is absurd, he muttered. His lawyer slid the file closer. You just have to sign. 6 months of a civil arrangement, then you are free. For a long moment, Ethan stared at the signature line. Marriage, to him, had always been a transaction between power and image. Maybe that was all it would ever be. Finally, with a cold, precise stroke, he signed his name. The next morning, in a quiet art studio across town, Clara Bennett was wiping paint from her fingers when her phone buzzed. Miss Bennett, a voice said over the line, polite but firm, your family's debt has been reviewed. There is one way to resolve it immediately. Her hand froze midair. What do you mean? A marriage arrangement with Mr. Ethan Cole. 6 months only. Your cooperation will settle your father's business loans. Clara's heart dropped. The name Ethan Cole was everywhere. Magazines, financial news, charity events. The kind of man who lived in a world she had only painted on her canvas, not one she would ever step into. I do not even know him, she whispered. You will, the voice replied. Tomorrow at 10. City Hall. By noon the next day, the rain had turned to mist. Inside a private office in the courthouse, Ethan and Clara stood side by side, strangers linked by a legal document. He was tall, sharp in a charcoal suit, the air around him crisp with quiet authority. She was small, her beige dress simple, her hair pinned neatly. No diamonds, no perfume, only the faint scent of paint and lavender soap. The judge cleared his throat. Do you, Ethan Cole, take Clara Bennett? Yes, Ethan cut in, his tone flat, almost mechanical. Clara looked up, startled. Her pulse quickened. I. Doe. The pen clicked as they both signed. The judge smiled, unaware that this was not a love story but a business transaction disguised as one. As they stepped out of the courthouse, a flash of lightning streaked across the sky. Ethan handed her an umbrella without meeting her eyes. There are 5 rules, he said, his voice low. 1. No emotions. 2. No interference in each other's lives. 3. Appear together at public events when required. 4. Maintain privacy. 5. He paused, his eyes finally meeting hers. We end this quietly after 6 months. No strings. Clara nodded. Understood. She slipped the silver ring onto her finger, simple, cold, and a little too loose. He had not even measured her size. As their car pulled away, she looked out the window at the rain-soaked city, her reflection pale against the glass. She whispered to herself, I guess this is my new life. Beside her, Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, emotionless. But as he glanced at her reflection in the glass, the quiet determination in her eyes, the way she held her trembling hands steady, something inside him shifted, just a fraction. For the first time that day, Ethan Cole looked at his new wife, not as a clause in a contract, but as a mystery he could not yet define. The morning after the quiet courthouse wedding, Clara woke up in a place that did not feel like hers. The guest room of Ethan Cole's penthouse was larger than her entire apartment. White marble floors, spotless glass walls, a view that stretched over the Hudson River. Everything gleamed with order and silence. She stood barefoot near the window, holding the small suitcase she had brought. Inside were only a few clothes and her sketchbook. She placed it on the dresser, her fingers tracing the cover. It felt strange, this life built on paper and signatures. The door opened softly. Ethan appeared, perfectly dressed in a dark suit, adjusting his watch. "Breakfast is downstairs. My driver will take you to the office after." She turned. "Office?" He nodded without looking at her. "Public relations wants us to have a photo session. It is necessary to make the marriage look credible." Clara's lips parted, but she said nothing. He walked out before she could answer. Downstairs, the dining table looked like something out of a magazine: fresh fruit, warm croissants, steaming coffee. Clara sat on the edge of her chair. She reached for a cup just as Ethan glanced up from his phone. "You do not have to act nervous," he said. "Just remember the rules." "I remember," she replied quietly. He studied her for a moment, the morning light cutting across his face. There was something unreadable in his eyes, curiosity or pity. She could not tell. "You will get used to this place," he said finally. "I doubt that," she whispered almost to herself. The photo shoot took place that afternoon in the rooftop garden. The air smelled faintly of lavender and rain. The photographer adjusted his lens while assistants moved like clockwork. Clara stood beside Ethan, trying to look relaxed. Every flash of the camera felt like lightning. "Closer," the photographer said. "Smile like you mean it." Ethan placed his hand lightly at Clara's waist. She froze for a second, then forced a small smile. The photographer captured it, a perfect image of a loving couple. But behind the camera, Ethan noticed her trembling hand holding the hem of her dress, and for a brief moment, he felt guilty. Afterward, as the team packed up, Ethan turned to her. "You did well. I just followed directions," she said. "Good. That is what this arrangement is about: cooperation." Her tone stayed calm. "I understand. You do not have to remind me every hour." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan looked at her again, surprised at her quiet boldness. That night, Clara sat alone on the balcony, sketching under the glow of the city. The hum of traffic below mixed with the soft rustle of her pencil. On the page, she drew the skyline, but one small figure appeared at the center, a man in a suit, standing under the rain, umbrella closed, eyes hidden. She heard footsteps. Ethan walked out, holding a glass of water. For a moment, neither spoke. "You draw?" he asked. She closed the book halfway. "Sometimes it helps me think." He nodded. "My mother used to paint. She said people show their truth on canvas." Clara looked up at him, the night air brushing her hair. "And what truth do you show, Mr. Cole?" He gave a short laugh, low and tired. "None worth painting." He turned to leave, but something stopped him. "If you need anything," he said without looking back, "ask my assistant. She handles everything." When the door closed, Clara stared at the city again. The noise, the light, the unreachable stars, it all looked beautiful from a distance, but cold up close. She whispered, "What am I doing here?" The next day, the tabloids exploded. Ethan Cole marries a mystery woman. Who is the plain bride of Manhattan's most eligible bachelor? Photos from the rooftop session filled every screen. Some called her elegant, most called her lucky. None called her by name. Ethan saw the headlines as he stepped into his office. His assistant, Marla, looked uneasy. "They are digging into her background. Should I issue a statement?" He glanced at the pictures again, her quiet smile beside his unreadable face. "No," he said. "Let them talk." But that night, when he came home and saw her sitting in the living room, reading those same headlines on her phone, something twisted inside him. "They think I trapped you," she said softly. "That I am after your money." He exhaled, setting his briefcase down. "They always talk. Ignore it." "I am trying," she replied, her voice breaking just slightly. "But it is hard to ignore something that calls you worthless." Ethan looked at her for a long time. The rain started again outside, tapping gently against the glass. Finally, he said, "Do not read what people write. They never see what is real." She met his gaze, calm but firm. "Then maybe you should start seeing it too." For the first time since they met, Ethan had no answer. The silence between them felt heavier than any contract they had signed. A week later, the mansion had grown quieter, but tension filled every hallway. The marriage everyone thought was perfect was, in truth, a business arrangement built on rules and distance. Ethan Cole worked late every night, his light glowing in the upstairs study until dawn. Clara stayed in the guest room, painting in silence, her only comfort the view of the city from the balcony. That evening, while the wind whispered against the windows, she walked into the library to return a book she had borrowed. The room was dim, filled with the scent of cedar and dust. She paused when she saw Ethan asleep at his desk, still in his shirt and tie, head resting on folded arms. Beside him lay an untouched cup of coffee and a folder labeled Inheritance Audit. For a moment, she hesitated. He looked different in sleep, less sharp, almost human. A strand of hair had fallen over his forehead. Without thinking, she stepped closer and quietly draped a blanket over his shoulders. His eyes opened halfway. "Clara," he murmured. "Go back to sleep," she said softly. "You will catch a cold." He blinked, half awake, confused by her kindness, but she was already turning to leave. "Thank you," he said quietly. She stopped, then nodded. "Good night, Ethan." When the door closed, Ethan stared at the blanket for a long moment, wondering when the silence between them had started to feel so loud. The next morning, the house staff prepared for an event. Ethan had promised to attend a charity gala to honor the company's expansion. Clara was expected to accompany him. It would be their first public appearance since the wedding. When she stepped out of her room that evening, Ethan was waiting near the staircase, his black suit immaculate, his cufflinks catching the light. But for once, he forgot to hide his expression. Clara was wearing a navy gown that brushed the floor, her hair pinned loosely, a single silver earring glinting against her skin. She looked nothing like the plain woman the tabloids had mocked. She looked steady, quietly beautiful. He caught himself staring. "You clean up well," he said, trying to sound casual. She smiled faintly. "That is the nicest thing you have said to me in 2 weeks." He chuckled under his breath. "Then I should talk more." "Maybe," she replied. "But not if it is only for appearances." He said nothing, but his gaze lingered as they walked out together. At the gala, camera flashes greeted them like lightning. The sound of chatter and champagne glasses filled the grand ballroom. Ethan led her through the crowd, their hands touching briefly for the sake of the cameras. She held herself with quiet grace, smiling when needed, nodding politely. A reporter approached. "Mr. Cole, Mrs. Cole, congratulations on your marriage. How did you two meet?" Clara opened her mouth, but Ethan answered first. "Through family friends." His tone was even practiced. The reporter pressed on. "And is it true your marriage was arranged for business reasons?" The crowd stirred. Clara froze, every flash of a camera like a pulse in her chest. Ethan was about to speak, but she stepped forward instead. She smiled politely. "If you call kindness a business deal, then yes. My husband offered me a contract, and I agreed. But not everything written on paper tells the whole story." The room went quiet. The reporter blinked, unsure how to respond. Ethan looked at her in surprise. For the first time, she was not just standing beside him, she was standing for herself. Later, when they slipped away to the terrace for air, the city lights shimmered below. Clara leaned on the railing, breathing out slowly. "You handled that well," Ethan said, his voice low. "I handled it honestly," she replied. He nodded. "You were right earlier. I do not always see what is real." "Who?" She turned to him, eyes calm but searching. "Why did you agree to this marriage, Ethan? Truly." He exhaled, staring into the dark skyline. "Because I was raised to think control was the same as safety. I thought love was a weakness that distracted people from building things that last." "And now?" she asked. He looked at her. "Now I am not sure." A small smile touched her lips. "That sounds like progress." The wind caught a loose strand of her hair. Ethan reached out instinctively to tuck it behind her ear, then stopped himself halfway. She did not move away. For one heartbeat, they just stood there, the distance between them narrowing without either of them meaning to. Later that night, Clara returned to her room, her heart still unsteady. She opened her sketchbook and began to draw. On the page, she captured the image of 2 silhouettes standing on a terrace, the city glowing beneath them. She titled it, "Almost Close." In the next room, Ethan sat alone with a glass of whiskey, replaying her words. Control, safety, weakness. The way she had looked at him when she spoke without fear, without pretension, made something shift deep inside him. He glanced at the folded blanket still draped over the chair from the night she had covered him. He reached out, touching the fabric. For the first time in years, he smiled, quietly and without reason. Outside, the city hummed, unaware that a marriage built on rules had just taken its first small step toward something real. The following week, the tabloids slowly lost interest. The frenzy around Ethan and Clara faded into background noise, replaced by fresher gossip. For the first time since their contract began, life settled into a strange rhythm. Ethan spent mornings at the office, but unlike before, he started coming home earlier. Sometimes, he would find Clara sitting on the balcony, painting while the sunset turned the city gold. She never noticed him watching from the doorway, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. One evening, he stepped outside and said quietly, "You paint every day." She looked up from her canvas. "It helps me breathe." "Oh, what are you painting this time?" She smiled faintly. "The view, but it never looks the same twice. It changes every day." He nodded. "Maybe you are just seeing it differently." She tilted her head. "Or maybe the world is softer when you finally stop trying to control it." He chuckled softly. "Are you saying that to me or yourself?" "Both," she replied, her tone warm but teasing. It was the first time they laughed together without pretense. A few days later, Ethan invited Clara to join him at a business dinner. It was supposed to be another public appearance, but this time he did not ask his assistant to brief her. The restaurant glowed with candlelight, the hum of low conversation surrounding them. Across the table, Ethan watched her study the menu, her hair falling gently across her cheek. "Do you always think before every choice?" he asked. She looked up. "Only when the choices matter." The waiter arrived. Ethan ordered for both of them. "Trust me," he said with a small smile. "I am learning to," she answered. The words caught him off guard. Trust. It was such a simple word, but it landed like a promise. As dinner continued, their conversation drifted away from contracts and work. She told him about her mother's illness, the long nights in hospitals, and the quiet courage it took to keep going. He listened not as a businessman, but as a man trying to understand a world he had never seen. When the check came, Ethan left a generous tip and offered his arm as they walked out into the cool night. The streetlights shimmered on wet pavement. For once, he did not rush to the car. "Clara," he said softly, "if things had been different, if there was no contract, do you think we would have met?" She hesitated. "Maybe not. But maybe that is what makes this real. We would never have chosen this, and yet here we are." He looked at her then, really looked, and realized that for the first time in years, he felt peace. The following morning, Clara received an invitation from the Cole Foundation to participate in a charity art exhibit. She was hesitant, unsure if she should attend as Ethan's wife or as herself. When Ethan saw the invitation on the counter, he said, "You should go. Your work deserves to be seen." She frowned. "People will think I got in because of you." "Then prove them wrong," he replied. "Show them what I see when you paint." Her heart caught on those words. "And what do you see?" He met her eyes. Someone who makes even silence feel alive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was gentle, fragile, full of things left unsaid. At the exhibition, Clara stood among dozens of artists. The gallery lights gleamed off polished floors, and soft music played in the background. Her paintings, cityscapes in muted tones, filled with light and longing, drew quiet admiration. She stood off to the side, trying to stay invisible. Then she heard someone say, "That is the wife of Ethan Cole." A small group turned to look at her, some with curiosity, others with judgment. Clara kept her gaze on her painting, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the whispers. "Excuse me," Ethan said as he stepped beside her, his hand resting lightly at her back. "My wife's art speaks for itself. You do not need my name to understand it." The crowd fell silent. Cameras flashed. Clara looked up at him, startled but moved. Afterward, when the event ended and the guests dispersed, Ethan and Clara lingered in the quiet gallery. Only the low hum of the lights remained. "You did not have to defend me," she said softly. "Yes, I did," he replied. "Because they were wrong. You are not a story for tabloids to twist. You are a story worth hearing." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are different lately. Maybe I am just starting to see clearly." She smiled, her eyes bright. "Then maybe I should keep painting." "Please do," he said, "because every time you paint, I feel less like a stranger in my own life." That night, Back in the penthouse, Ethan found himself standing in front of one of her unfinished canvases. It showed a figure standing under the rain with his hands open, as if waiting for something he did not yet understand. He traced the edge of the frame and whispered to the empty room, "Maybe I am the one waiting." Outside, the city pulsed with quiet light. Inside, somewhere between two hearts bound by paper, something unspoken began to grow, something that neither of them could call love yet, but both of them could finally feel. The next few weeks moved quietly, like pages turning in a book neither of them wanted to finish. The marriage that began with a signature was slowly changing shape. Ethan no longer counted the days left in the contract. Clara no longer avoided the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. They had fallen into an easy rhythm, morning coffee shared in silence, small smiles that needed no explanation. One afternoon, Ethan stopped by the gallery where Clara volunteered. He stood by the entrance, watching her talk to a young student about color and light. She looked at peace there, her voice soft but sure. When she finally noticed him, she smiled in surprise. "You came," she said. "I did not have a meeting today," he replied. "And I wanted to see how you turn chaos into beauty." She laughed. "You make it sound like magic." "Maybe it is," he said, watching her closely. The warmth in his voice startled her. She turned back to her easel, pretending not to notice. "Do you ever paint?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. I build things that cast shadows. You create things that bring light." Her brush paused for a moment. The words settled in her chest like a heartbeat. That weekend, Ethan invited her to a charity gala for the Cole Foundation. It was one of the biggest nights of the year, attended by investors, politicians, and journalists. Clara hesitated, remembering how cruel public attention could be. But Ethan promised it would be different this time. When she entered the ballroom, heads turned again, but this time, the whispers were softer. She wore an elegant black gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, her confidence quiet but steady. Ethan guided her through the crowd, his hand lightly resting at her back. Halfway through the evening, one of the board members approached Ethan. "Cole, congratulations. I must say, your wife carries herself better than most of our PR directors. Quite the transformation." Ethan smiled politely. She was never the one who needed transforming. The man laughed awkwardly and excused himself. Clara looked up at Ethan, surprised. He simply shrugged. "I told you," he said. "People only see what they are ready to see." Later that night, the host invited Ethan to the stage to speak about the company's new charity initiative. As he began his speech, Clara stood at the edge of the room, proud but nervous. Midway through, a journalist interrupted with a loud question. "Mr. Cole, is it true your marriage was part of your inheritance deal?" The room froze. All eyes turned toward Ethan. He hesitated for a heartbeat. The truth was something he had never denied but never confirmed either. He could have dismissed the question, but when he saw Clara's anxious expression, he chose differently. He said calmly, "Yes, it began as an arrangement, but what started as an obligation taught me more about integrity, kindness, and humility than any contract ever could." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Ethan's voice stayed steady. "Sometimes the things we do for business reveal who we really are. And I am grateful to my wife for reminding me that people, not profits, are what make life worth living." When he stepped off the stage, Clara met his eyes, her heart pounding. "You did not have to say that," she whispered. "Yes, I did," he replied. "You deserve the truth, even if the world does not understand it." As the evening ended, rain began to fall outside. The driver pulled the car around, but Ethan stopped him. "Let us walk," he said. Clara laughed. "In this rain? Why not? You like storms." They stepped out under the awning, the city shimmering with reflections. For a moment, they simply stood there, letting the rain cool the heat of the evening. Ethan reached out, brushing a drop of water from her cheek. "Clara," he said softly, "you once told me the world looks different when you stop trying to control it. I think I finally understand what you meant." She smiled. "What do you see now?" "You," he said. "You are the calm inside all this noise." She looked up at him, her heart catching. For the first time since their marriage began, there was no contract between them, only quiet truth. Back at the penthouse, Clara found a note on her dresser the next morning. In Ethan's handwriting, it said, "Lunch at the bistro at noon. No photographers, just us." She smiled, folding the note carefully. When she arrived, Ethan was already there, waiting with 2 coffees. "No business meetings today," he said. No rules, either. She laughed. Are you sure you can handle that? Maybe not, he said, smiling. But I want to try. They spent the afternoon talking about everything but the company, art, travel, childhood memories. For the first time, Ethan shared stories about his late parents, about the boy who once built skyscrapers out of cereal boxes. Clara listened quietly, realizing the man who once seemed carved from stone was slowly learning how to be human again. When they finally left, the sun was setting over the city, painting the skyline in soft gold. Ethan opened the car door for her, his voice gentle. You know, I used to think this marriage would end the moment the contract did. And now? She asked. He met her eyes. Now I am afraid 6 months will not be enough. She said nothing, but the look she gave him said everything he needed to hear. The contract had started as a wall between them, but without either of them noticing, it had become a bridge. And somewhere between obligation and honesty, love had quietly begun to bloom. A few days later, Ethan woke before dawn. The city outside was still asleep, blanketed in fog. He sat by the window, watching the light creep between the skyscrapers. Something had changed in him, something he could not define. The man who once measured his worth by numbers now found himself replaying moments, a laugh, a look, the way Clara's voice softened when she said his name. He realized he wanted to see her before anything else that morning. Downstairs, the scent of coffee filled the kitchen. Clara was already there, barefoot, pouring milk into her cup. Her hair was loosely tied, a few strands brushing her neck. Good morning, she said, her tone easy. Morning, he replied, leaning against the counter. Do you always wake up this early? Old habit, she said. When my mother was sick, I used to get up before sunrise to help her with medicine. He nodded quietly. You still do it, even when there is no reason to. Clara smiled faintly. Maybe I just like the quiet before the world wakes up. Ethan studied her for a moment. You make quiet sound like peace. She looked at him, eyes soft. Maybe that is what you needed all along. That afternoon, they visited the Cole Foundation's Children's Art Center. Clara had been teaching there part-time since the exhibition, helping underprivileged kids find comfort through painting. Ethan came along, curious. Inside, the walls were covered in bright splashes of color, the air filled with laughter and the smell of acrylic paint. A young boy ran up, showing Clara a drawing of the city skyline. Look, Miss Clara, I made the buildings glow. She crouched beside him, smiling. That is beautiful. You made them look alive. Ethan watched her from the doorway, his chest tightening in a way he had not felt in years. The children loved her, and she belonged here in this room full of hope and light. When she caught him watching, she waved him over. Come on, Mr. Cole, we could use another volunteer. He laughed. I am terrible at art. Then you will fit right in, she said playfully. He knelt beside a small girl who handed him a paintbrush. You can help me paint the sky, she said. Ethan hesitated, then dipped the brush into blue paint. For the next hour, the millionaire who once signed billion-dollar deals sat cross-legged on the floor, covered in paint, helping children fill the world with color. When they left the center, Clara glanced at his hands. You have paint on your sleeve. He smiled. I know. I am keeping it. Proof that I survived art class. She laughed, and for a moment, the sound felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. That evening, back at the penthouse, Ethan walked into the living room to find Clara sorting through papers on the coffee table. What is all this? He asked. She looked up. I was checking the contract. It ends next month. The air shifted. He stared at her, silent. She continued, her voice calm but steady. We said 6 months. No emotions, no strings. But life does not really follow rules, does it? He took a slow breath. Do you want out? Her eyes lifted to his. Do you? Ethan crossed the room, stopping in front of her. Clara, when this began, I thought I was protecting myself. I thought if I followed the rules, I would not get hurt. He paused, his voice low. But you ruined all of that. She blinked, startled. Ruined? Yes, he said softly. You made me feel. You made me care. You made me want more than a contract. Her eyes glistened. Then what are you saying? I am saying, he whispered, that the 6 months can end, but I do not want us to. Before she could answer, a phone rang. Ethan picked it up, his expression darkening. It was Marla, his assistant. Mr. Cole, I am sorry to bother you, but there is a problem. Someone leaked the original contract to the press. They know everything. The next morning, chaos erupted. Headlines screamed across every platform. Ethan Cole's fake marriage exposed. Arranged love. The Millionaire's scandal. Paparazzi surrounded the building. Clara could barely step outside. Online, strangers mocked her again, calling her a gold digger, a liar, a fraud. Ethan stood at the window, phone in hand, fury in his eyes. "It is my uncle," he said. "He has wanted control of the company for years. This is his way to destroy me." Clara shook her head. "He is not just destroying you, Ethan. He is destroying me too." He turned to her, his voice rough. "Then I will fix it. I promise." "You cannot fix this with money or lawyers," she said. "The truth has to come from you." Ethan looked at her, torn between anger and shame. "If I admit everything, it could cost me the company. And if you do not," she said quietly, "you will lose something more important." The room fell silent. The storm outside beat against the windows, echoing the storm inside them. Ethan looked at her, realizing that this was the test he had spent his whole life avoiding, the moment where integrity mattered more than power. He took a deep breath. "Then I will tell them the truth." Clara met his eyes. "Not for me, for yourself." He nodded slowly. "For both of us." Outside, thunder rolled through the city. Ethan Cole, the man who once believed emotions were weakness, was about to face the world with nothing but honesty and love. And for the first time, he was not afraid. By the next morning, Ethan Cole had made his choice. He stood before the mirror, buttoning his suit jacket, his reflection calm but resolute. The city outside was still gray from last night's storm, and reporters were already waiting downstairs. He knew that by the end of the day, his reputation, his company, maybe even his fortune could be gone. But for the first time, it did not matter. Clara waited near the elevator, holding a folder. "You do not have to do this alone," she said softly. He looked at her, his expression warm but steady. "I started this alone, Clara. Let me finish it the right way." She reached out, touching his sleeve. "Whatever happens, I am proud of you." He gave a small nod and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and she was left staring at her reflection in the metal surface, whispering, "Please, let them see the man I see." At noon, the press conference began. The room was filled with cameras, flashes bursting like lightning. Ethan walked to the podium, his voice steady but low. "There has been speculation about my marriage," he began. "So let me be honest. Yes, it started as an arrangement, a business contract. I did it to keep control of my father's company." Gasps filled the air. Reporters scribbled furiously. Ethan continued, not flinching. "But what I did not expect was that a contract could turn into something real. I met someone who showed me what it means to build a life that is not based on power or profit. Her name is Clara. She is my wife, and she has taught me what authenticity looks like." A reporter shouted, "Are you saying you are in love with her?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I am saying she made me a better man. You can call that love if you want." The room fell quiet. Back at the penthouse, Clara watched the live broadcast on television. Tears filled her eyes as she heard his words. For months, she had doubted whether he would ever choose truth over control. Now she knew he had. When Ethan returned home that evening, the lobby was packed with journalists, but he ignored them. Inside, Clara was waiting by the window, her hands trembling slightly. "They will tear you apart," she said, her voice breaking. "Let them try," he replied. "For the first time, I am not pretending." She looked at him through tears. "You just risked everything." He stepped closer, his tone gentle but firm. "You are everything I was risking for." She could not find words. He took her hand, pressing it to his chest. "I spent years protecting an empire I could not feel. But with you, I finally learned what it means to care about something that breathes." She whispered, "You cannot fix this overnight." "I do not want to fix it," he said. "I want to start over." The rain began again outside, soft and steady. Clara rested her head against him, the rhythm of his heartbeat steady under her palm. For the first time, there were no rules left, no lines drawn in ink, only two people who had broken every condition of a contract and discovered something true in the wreckage. Outside, the city glowed through the rain, unaware that the man who once built towers of glass had just chosen something stronger, love that could not be bought or arranged. The scandal hit every news outlet within hours, but the reaction was not what Ethan expected. Some criticized him for the deception, yet many admired his honesty. Business magazines ran headlines that read, "The CEO who chose truth over power." For the first time, Ethan Cole was not being discussed as a ruthless millionaire, but as a man who had learned humility the hard way. Clara, however, stayed away from the spotlight. She spent her days at the art center, trying to drown out the noise. Even though Ethan had stood up for her, she still carried the weight of public judgment. Every glance, every whisper in the street reminded her of the contract that had once defined her. One evening, she came home late to find the penthouse dark except for the soft glow from the study. Ethan was there, sitting on the floor surrounded by sketches, paintbrushes, and empty coffee cups. Her sketchbook was open in his lap. "You found it," she said quietly. He looked up. "I did. You drew all of this while living here?" "Yes," she replied, stepping closer. "Every piece tells how I felt trapped at first, then lost, and finally free." Oh, he stood, brushing the charcoal from his hands. "These deserve to be seen," she frowned. "I do not want another headline." "It will not be about headlines," he said. "It will be about truth." 2 weeks later, Ethan arranged a surprise. The old Cole Foundation gallery was transformed into an intimate exhibition titled The Art of Clara Bennett. Invitations were sent to friends, artists, and journalists, but this time, there was no pretense. No hidden motive. When Clara arrived and saw her paintings displayed on white walls under soft light, she froze. Each piece carried a fragment of her journey: the gray city skyline, the quiet balcony, the figure standing in the rain. At the end of the hall hung the newest piece, one she had never shown anyone. It was a portrait of Ethan, not in a suit, but barefoot in the storm, reaching for light. She turned to him, tears in her eyes. "You did all this?" He smiled gently. "You once said art helps people breathe. You helped me remember how." The guests began to gather around them. Cameras flashed, but for once, neither of them cared. Ethan took her hand and guided her to the front of the gallery. He faced the crowd and spoke clearly. "I have spent most of my life building things made of steel and glass. Tonight, I want to build something made of trust. This exhibition is not just about art. It is about honesty, redemption, and the courage to start again." Then he turned to Clara, his voice softening. "You told me once that the world changes when you stop trying to control it. You were right. I stopped controlling the moment I met you." A hush fell over the room. Ethan dropped to one knee and pulled from his pocket the same silver ring she had worn on their wedding day. "I would like to rewrite our contract, Clara," he said. "But this time, it will have only one clause: love without conditions." Tears filled her eyes as she covered her mouth. "Ethan!" He looked up at her, smiling. "Will you marry me for real this time?" For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Then she nodded through her tears. "Yes. 1,000 times, yes." The crowd erupted into applause. Ethan stood, slipping the old silver ring back onto her finger. The same ring that had once symbolized obligation now shone with new meaning, choice, trust, and love freely given. In that moment, the noise, the scandals, the doubts, all of it faded. What remained was simple and real: two people who had found each other through chaos and chosen to stay. The morning light spilled gently across the gallery floor, falling over the last of the flowers left from the night before. The exhibition had ended, but its warmth lingered in every corner of the room. Ethan and Clara stood together among her paintings, hands entwined, still trying to believe what had happened. For the first time, there were no cameras, no contracts, and no eyes watching from behind glass walls. There was only the quiet sound of their breathing and the soft echo of footsteps on polished wood. Ethan looked around the gallery and smiled. "It feels different now," he said, like the noise finally stopped. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "Maybe it never was noise," she said softly. "Maybe it was just the world waiting for us to listen." He turned to face her fully. "You changed everything, Clara. You turned an arrangement into a life." She smiled. "You learned how to love without needing control. I just reminded you that love is not a transaction." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And you reminded me that the best things in life are not written in ink, they are painted with trust." A month later, the small garden behind the Cole Foundation was filled with soft music and laughter. Only a few friends and co-workers were there. The air smelled of roses and rain. Clara wore a simple white dress, and Ethan waited for her under an arch of lights. When she walked toward him, the world seemed to slow. Every doubt, every wall that once stood between them had vanished. The officiant smiled. "Ethan, do you take Clara to be your wife, not by contract, but by heart?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "I already do. And Clara, do you take Ethan to be your husband?" She smiled through tears. "I always have." The guests clapped as they exchanged rings, not the old silver one this time, but two gold bands engraved with a single word: truth. Later that night, they stood together under the city lights, watching the skyline shimmer. Clara whispered, "Do you ever think about how it all began? A deal, a deadline, a stranger." Ethan smiled. "And now, it feels like fate disguised as paperwork." She laughed softly. "Maybe every wrong beginning is just the right story waiting to be written." He kissed her forehead, his voice barely above a whisper. "To new beginnings, Mrs. Cole." She looked up at him, her eyes shining, "to love that needs no signature." The camera of the mind pulled back as the lights of New York sparkled behind them. The man who once measured everything by numbers and the woman who painted life in color had finally found what neither of them could buy: peace, honesty, and love that asked for nothing in return. Sometimes, the plainest love stories shine the brightest.